year was 1967. The world was not divided by a hot war, but by a long twilight struggle, as the late President Kennedy had called it. This struggle was fought not on battlefields, but in briefing rooms, in dead drops by the Tiergarten, and in the meticulous, gray archives of government buildings. Arthur Vance was a man of those buildings. He worked for the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C., specifically in the Bureau of European Affairs. His role was unglamorous but necessary: records management and low-level analysis of diplomatic cables originating from the Eastern Bloc. He was, in the parlance of the time, a gray man, a necessary cog in the vast machinery of American foreign policy. Arthur was precise, quiet, and deeply patriotic in a way that was falling out of fashion. He still believed in the mission. He believed in the clear, delineated line between us and them. His apartment in Foggy Bottom was as meticulously organized as his files, filled with history books and classical records. He was unmarried. His work was his life, and his only significant personal connection was his sister, Eleanor. Eleanor Vance was everything Arthur was not. Where he was gray, she was vibrant. Where he was cautious, she was bold. 2 years his junior, she had been recruited out of Georgetown's School of Foreign Service directly into the Central Intelligence Agency. This was not spoken of openly, of course. To the family and to Arthur's colleagues at State, Eleanor was a cultural attaché posted to the U.S. mission in West Berlin. Arthur knew better. He knew cultural attaché was a standard cover for the agency. He felt a profound sense of pride in her. While he sorted the history of the Cold War, Eleanor was on its front line, an island of freedom surrounded by the GDR. Their correspondence was regular but sanitized, subject to the awareness of censors on both sides. Her letters spoke of the dynamic art scene in West Berlin, the resilience of the Berliners, and the absurdity of the wall. Arthur's letters spoke of the humid DC summer, promotions at the office, and the rising tension over Vietnam, which dominated the news cycles. Arthur's world was defined by procedure. He arrived at the State Department building, known as New State, at 8:00. He reviewed overnight cable traffic, flagging reports for his superiors. His clearance was top secret, but he lacked the need to know for operational specifics. He saw the results of espionage, the reports from assets, the diplomatic protests, the analysis of Soviet propaganda, but never the methods. He handled summaries of reports from agency sources in Berlin, categorized under code names like Pony or Jupiter. He often wondered if Eleanor had interviewed the sources, perhaps translated the documents herself. It made him feel connected to her, a shared purpose separated by the Atlantic and a wall of classification. The atmosphere in Washington was thick. The shadow of McCarthyism had receded, but the paranoia it fostered had simply gone institutional. Every government employee was subject to periodic security updates, interviews with humorless men from security who asked invasive questions about one's habits, finances, and associations. Loyalty was not assumed, it was a thing to be constantly proven. Arthur, with his quiet life, always passed with ease. He was the model of a reliable public servant. He believed, fundamentally, in the system he served. He did not yet understand that this system, in its relentless pursuit of security, was built to consume the very loyalty it demanded. The first inconsistencies were minor, microscopic fissures in the granite facade of Arthur's organized world. They were the sort of things a less meticulous man would have dismissed as standard bureaucratic friction. Arthur, however, cataloged them. It began in the spring of 1967 with the loss of a low-level asset, Sparrow. Sparrow was a librarian at the Humboldt University in East Berlin. He provided occasional low-grade intelligence, faculty lists, assessments of academic morale, and copies of internal Communist Party (SED) directives for the university. His value was minimal, but he was part of a larger network mapping the intellectual climate of the GDR. The cable Arthur reviewed was brief. Sparrow had been exposed and detained by the Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, the Stasi. The report, originating from the Berlin Operations Base, BIAB, attributed the exposure to a recent pattern of heightened vigilance by the HVA, the Stasi's foreign intelligence arm. This was common. Assets were lost. It was the cost of doing business. But Arthur, reviewing the file, noted something odd. Sparrow's final report, delivered 3 weeks prior, had been a simple list of academics attending a conference in Prague. The Berlin station had requested this information specifically. Why? It seemed trivial. And why was Sparrow detained after delivering something so mundane and not after his more substantive reports? It felt inefficient. He filed the report, but the discrepancy lodged itself in his mind. In July, Eleanor came home on leave. She arrived at Dulles looking impossibly sophisticated, wearing a fashionable European-cut suit and smoking a brand of French cigarettes. She seemed thinner, her vibrancy overlaid with a new, brittle tension. Arthur attributed it to the stress of Berlin. "Arthur, you're still pushing paper at state, I see," she'd said over dinner at his apartment, a hint of something, pity perhaps, in her voice. "Still sorting the world into neat little boxes." "It's important work, Ellie," he defended, stung. "It's the foundation. Policy is built on that paper." "Policy," she scoffed lightly, blowing a stream of smoke. "You should see the policy on the ground. It's a game. A ridiculous, pointless game played by old men who still think in terms of zones of influence. They don't care about the people, Arthur. Not really, on either side." He was taken aback by her cynicism. This wasn't the idealistic sister who had gone to Georgetown. "You sound burned out, Ellie. Maybe you should ask for a transfer. Stateside." She laughed, a sharp, unfamiliar sound. "Oh, I'm not burned out, Arthur. I'm just clear-eyed. Berlin does that. It clears your eyes. You see the machinery. All of it." Later that week, he was tidying the guest room when he noticed her pack of cigarettes on the nightstand. They weren't French. They were Club or Cabinet, East German brands. He'd seen the empty packets photographed in surveillance reports. He confronted her mildly. "These aren't from Paris, Ellie." She didn't miss a beat. "Goodness, no. I got them from a defector during a debriefing. He was desperate for a real cigarette, so we traded. I kept these as a souvenir. You can't imagine the awful things they smoke over there." It was a perfect explanation. Plausible, detailed, and slightly self-deprecating. It satisfied him. Almost. But when she left, returning to Berlin, Arthur felt a disquiet he couldn't name. He returned to his files, but the neat lines of his world seemed, for the first time, to blur. The librarian's exposure and his sister's cynical new edge felt like two separate notes in a dissonant chord, one he couldn't yet resolve. The discovery did not happen with a shout, but with the dry rustle of aging paper. It was October, a cool, damp Tuesday evening in Washington. Arthur was working late, not from immediate pressure, but from his own fastidious need to clear a backlog of misfiled reports from the previous fiscal year. The office was quiet, the only sounds the hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant clatter of a janitor's cart. He was working through a box labeled Berlin Station 1966, debriefs, terminated assets. Most were routine. Then he pulled a file for Operation Cinder. He remembered the name. It had been a significant failure, a black eye for the Berlin base. The operation's goal had been the exfiltration of a mid-level HVA officer who had offered to defect. The entire network set up to retrieve him had been rolled up by the Stasi. The report was thick with annexes, post-mortems, and blame shifting. The official conclusion, signed by the Berlin station chief, Richard Kelleher, blamed procedural errors by the asset and unforeseen HVA counterintelligence operations. It was a standard bureaucratic closing of the books. Arthur read the details. He wasn't supposed to analyze operations, only file them, but the details of the Cinder failure were chilling in their completeness. The HVA had known every safe house, every communication signal, and the identity of every local agent involved. It was as if they had been handed the operational plan. He skimmed the list of base personnel cleared for access to the operational plan. It was a short list. Translators, signals officers, case officers, and there near the bottom, E. Vance, liaison, translator, cultural. Eleanor. This was not in itself unusual. She was in Berlin. She had the clearances. He felt a small jolt, a protective brotherly instinct, seeing her name tied to such a failure. He hoped she hadn't gotten any blowback. He was about to file it away when a new cable, just delivered by the comms room clerk for morning review, caught his eye. It was a notice no distribution, cable, a high-priority flash message from the current Berlin station chief. It reported the immediate critical compromise of an entire agent network within the East German Reichsbahn direction, the state railway. This network, codenamed Iron Horse, had been one of the CIA's most valuable, providing logistics data on Soviet troop movements. The cable was stark. Total exposure, all assets believed detained. Recommend immediate operational halt on all related networks. Source of compromise unknown, but appears catastrophic. Arthur felt a cold sweat prickle his neck. His mind, trained for pattern recognition, began to move. The Sparrow, librarian, compromise in the spring. The Operation Cinder, HVA defector, failure in 1966. And now, Iron Horse, railway network. These were three entirely separate networks. They operated in different sectors, with different case officers and different methods. He pulled the Sparrow file again. He looked at the Cinder file. He reread the Iron Horse cable. He felt like he was staring at three different maps, searching for a single intersecting street. What was the common link? The assets didn't know each other. The case officers were different. The targets were different. He went to the central routing logs, a task technically outside his purview, but the late-night quiet gave him cover. He began cross-referencing the dissemination lists for the raw intelligence packets from all three operations before they were compromised. Sparrow's university data, Cinder's exfiltration plan, Iron Horse's recent signal intercepts. The logs were long, dozens of names. Analysts at Langley, planners at State, military liaison officers, and on all three lists, the Berlin operations base. He narrowed his search to the Berlin internal distribution lists. Richard Kelleher, station chief. James Angleton's CI staff, by proxy, the case officers. And the Berlin station's translation pool. He found it. The one name, other than the station chief himself, who had signatory access or translation duties related to all three compromised operations, E. Vance. The blood drained from his face. It was impossible. It was a coincidence. Eleanor was a cultural attaché, but the files said otherwise. She had translated Sparrow's final, trivial report. She had been the primary translator for the HVA defector in Cinder, and she had logged time reviewing the Iron Horse intercepts, ostensibly to cross-reference railway terminology. In each case, her access was plausible, even necessary. In each case, shortly after her access, the operation had collapsed. The East German cigarettes. The bitter cynicism. You see the machinery, all of it. The file in his hands was no longer a report. It was an accusation, and it was pointed directly at his sister. Arthur Vance did not sleep. He went home to his Foggy Bottom apartment, but the familiar quiet was suffocating. He sat in his armchair, the record player silent, and stared at the wall. His mind, his greatest asset, was now his tormentor. It replayed every conversation, every letter, every shared glance with Eleanor, searching for the artifice. He was faced with an impossible choice. To report his suspicion meant destroying his sister, and very likely his own career. To accuse a CIA officer, his own sister, based on a pattern in old files, was a career-ending move if he was wrong. If he was right, the consequences were unthinkable. To do nothing meant betraying his oath, his country, and the very system he had dedicated his life to. He chose a third path, the path of the bureaucrat. He would not accuse. He would audit. For the next 2 weeks, Arthur lived a fractured existence. By day, he performed his duties with his usual gray efficiency, but his focus had sharpened. He was no longer just a records manager. He was a counterintelligence analyst, and his entire world was his target. He used his access, stretching it to its absolute limits, pulling files that were peripheral to his duties but central to his investigation. He created a timeline. He cross-referenced Eleanor's leave requests, her duty rosters, which he managed to access via a request to the Berlin mission's administrative liaison, and the dates of compromised operations. A new, sickening pattern emerged. It wasn't just the three major failures. There were smaller ones. A dead drop found empty, a surveillance detection route that was suddenly, inexplicably, compromised, a potential defector who simply vanished before the first contact. Each minor failure, mundane on its own, correlated with Eleanor's access to its planning file. She was a ghost in the machine. She was, he realized, brilliant. She wasn't targeting high-profile assets. She was targeting the infrastructure. She was giving the HVA the CIA's methods, not just its secrets. She was teaching them how to hunt. His surveillance became personal. He wrote Eleanor a long rambling letter complaining about his workload and the inefficiency of the State Department. He filled it with mundane details about his colleagues, his health, and his finances, knowing it would pass through the CIA mailroom and perhaps be read by her. It was a test. He was sending bait. He also began his own quiet internal security procedures. He started cleaning his phone, speaking only in oblique terms. He checked his apartment for listening devices, a task he'd only read about in security bulletins. He felt ridiculous, like a child playing spy, but the paranoia was a cold, necessary blanket. He focused on her finances. As a State Department employee, he had access to the interagency payroll summaries for foreign service personnel. Her salary was standard for a GS-12, but he remembered her apartment in Dahlem, a neighborhood he knew was expensive. He remembered her clothes, her casual talk of savvy currency trades. He made a discreet inquiry, fabricating a story about a family inheritance to a contact in the Treasury Department's Foreign Assets Division. The reply, when it came a week later, was encrypted and informal. There were no Vance inheritance records. But his contact, intrigued, did note that several large, untraceable currency conversions, West German marks to Swiss francs, had been flagged from a bank in Berlin, linked to an account with initial identifiers that could match his sister's. It was circumstantial. It was not proof. But for Arthur, the audit was complete. The pattern was undeniable. The coincidences were too numerous. His sister was an active, high-level penetration agent for the East German HVA. The knowledge settled on him like a physical weight. He felt no anger, only a profound, hollow sense of inevitability. He was a man of procedure, and the procedure now demanded a final, terrible step. He booked a flight to Berlin, using his accumulated annual leave. The official reason, a family visit. West Berlin in November was cold, damp, and electric. The city felt temporary, a gaudy, defiant outpost holding its breath. Arthur took a taxi from Tempelhof Airport, the driver navigating the streets with a manic energy. Arthur, by contrast, felt unnervingly calm. He had passed the point of panic and entered a state of cold resolution. Eleanor met him at the door of her apartment in Dahlem. It was, as he had suspected, far too large, furnished with expensive Danish modern pieces and abstract art. She hugged him, a gesture that felt studied, brittle. "Arthur, what a surprise! You should have given me more warning," she said, her voice bright. "It was a last-minute decision. The pressure in DC. I needed to get away," he lied. It felt surprisingly easy. They made small talk. He commented on the apartment. "The agency must be paying you well, Ellie." "Berlin is expensive," she deflected, pouring him a drink. "And I've been smart with my trades. You know the games. Buy low at the commissary, sell high to the locals." She was smooth. He observed her, not as a brother, but as a case officer assessing an asset. She was tense. Her eyes scanned the room as she spoke, a habit he hadn't noticed in July. They spent the day in a strained performance of normalcy. They visited the Brandenburg Gate, standing on the observation platform and staring over the death strip into the gray uniformity of the East. "It's horrible, isn't it?" Arthur said, testing her. Eleanor shrugged, pulling her coat tighter. "It's a wall. It keeps people in. We have our own walls, Arthur. They're just harder to see." The confrontation came that evening. They were back in her apartment, the tension stretching thin between them. Arthur had been waiting for his moment. While she was in the kitchen preparing dinner, he moved. He didn't search for a hidden radio or a microdot. He looked for the mundane. He checked her desk. It was clean. He checked her bookshelf, running his hand along the spines. He found it. Tucked inside a heavy volume of Goethe's poetry was a small spiral-bound notepad. It was a one-time pad. Arthur's blood ran cold. He had seen examples in security briefings, a series of 5-digit numerical groups used for encrypting and decrypting messages. Pages were perforated, designed to be torn out and destroyed after use. Several pages were missing. He was holding it when Eleanor returned, a tray in her hands. She stopped dead, her eyes fixed on the notepad. The color drained from her face. The performance was over. "What is that?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. "It's from Goethe," Arthur said, his own voice sounding distant. But the code isn't his. He didn't need to accuse her. She set the tray down with a shaking hand. "Arthur," she began, "you don't understand what it's like here. You can't. You sit in Washington and you read your files. I read the Cinder file, Ellie, and Sparrow, and the Iron Horse cable." He spoke the code names flatly. Her composure shattered. It wasn't tears. It was a flash of pure, cold fury. "You had no right. Those aren't your files." "They became my files," Arthur said, "when I found your name on all of them." She stared at him, her mind clearly racing, calculating. She tried to pivot. "It's not what you think, Arthur. It's complicated. Kelleher, the station is out of control. They're cowboys. They're risking a war. What I did, I was trying to stop them, to balance things, to prevent an escalation. It was the classic ideological defense, the third way." "Balance?" Arthur held up the pad. "Who is your handler, Ellie? HVA? Marcus?" Her sharp intake of breath was all the confirmation he needed. "You have to go," she whispered, her eyes darting to the door. "Forget you saw this. Forget you came. Go back to DC and file your reports. This is not your world. You will be crushed if you stay in it." "It is my world," Arthur replied, his voice heavy with the finality of his decision. "It's my sister. It's my country." He put the one-time pad in his coat pocket. "Arthur, don't," she pleaded, the first genuine emotion breaking through. It was fear. "They will destroy you too. They will destroy us, the family, everything." "They already have," he said. He walked out of the apartment, leaving her standing alone among her expensive, empty furniture. Arthur Vance did not go to the airport. He walked for an hour in the cold Berlin night, the one-time pad a dense, heavy weight in his pocket. He was a man suspended between two betrayals. He could board a plane, return to DC, and burn the notepad. He could bury the secret, and in doing so, become complicit. He would be betraying his oath, but saving his sister. Or he could do his duty. His feet, moving on autopilot, carried him to the U.S. mission. The Marine security guard at the gate eyed his diplomatic passport and his pale, drawn face, and let him pass. He didn't go to the diplomatic wing. He went to the entrance marked Berlin Operations Base and asked to see the head of counterintelligence. He was made to wait for 40 minutes in a featureless room that smelled of stale cigarettes and floor wax. Finally, a man entered. He was older than Arthur, with tired eyes and a rumpled suit. He introduced himself as Mr. Sands. "Mr. Vance, your state over at New State, you're on leave," Sands said. It wasn't a question. They had already run his file. "I am," Arthur said. "I need to report a counterintelligence matter, a significant one." "Go on." Arthur laid his cards on the table. He did it in the only way he knew how, as a bureaucratic report. He listed the operational code names: Cinder, Sparrow, Iron Horse. He detailed the timeline of compromises. He described the pattern of access. And then he placed the one-time pad on the Formica table between them. "This was recovered from the personal effects of Eleanor Vance, your cultural attaché." Sands's tired eyes sharpened. He picked up the pad, handling it delicately. He didn't express shock or disbelief. He simply nodded, a slow, grim acknowledgement, as if Arthur had just confirmed a deep, unspoken fear. "Where is she now?" Sands asked. "At her apartment. She knows I have this. She knows I know." Sands stood up. "Mr. Vance, you are to remain in this room. You will not contact anyone. You will not leave. A security officer will be posted outside. You will write down everything you just told me, everything your sister said, every detail. Do you understand?" "I understand," Arthur said. The fall was not a dramatic raid. It was a silent, administrative takedown. Sands made one call. Within 10 minutes, a retrieval team was dispatched. But Eleanor was gone. When the CI team arrived at her apartment, it was empty. She had taken nothing but her purse and a small overnight bag. She had known Arthur wouldn't go to the airport. She had known he would go to the mission. She had a 5-hour head start. The mission went into immediate lockdown. Arthur was escorted to a secure debriefing room. Richard Kelleher, the station chief, was summoned. Arthur watched through a one-way mirror as Sands informed Kelleher that his cultural attaché was an HVA agent. Kelleher's face went white. His career, Arthur knew, had just ended. The exposure was catastrophic. Eleanor had not just been a translator. She had been a Romeo agent's dream, burrowed deep into the heart of the Berlin base. The damage assessment began immediately. Every operation she had touched was considered compromised. Every asset she had contact with was ordered to ground. But Eleanor herself was not in the wind for long. She didn't make it to the Friedrichstrasse checkpoint. The HVA knew she was blown. A compromised agent was a liability, not an asset. She was a loose end. 2 days later, a cryptic message was passed through a back channel from the East German mission. They had detained a U.S. diplomat, Eleanor Vance, for violations of sovereign territory. It was a lie, a thin cover story. She had tried to cross. Her handlers, realizing she was burned, had arrested her. Or more likely, she had turned herself in, trading her knowledge for safe haven. The CIA had been betrayed by one of its own. The HVA had captured a U.S. spy, and Arthur Vance, the catalyst, was now a person of interest, trapped in a secure room in the very building his sister had betrayed. Arthur Vance was not a suspect, but he was not an ally. He was a person of interest, a security risk, and worst of all, a relative. He was flown from Berlin to Dulles on a military transport, not a commercial flight. He was met on the tarmac not by his State Department superiors, but by 2 men from the CIA's Office of Security. They were polite, firm, and carried the unmistakable aura of institutional authority. He was taken to a secure facility in suburban Virginia, a nondescript building known only by its post office box. It was, effectively, a debriefing center. His interrogation, they called it a debriefing, was nothing like the movies. There were no bright lights, no physical duress. It was far more grinding. His life was disassembled, piece by piece, by a rotating team of analysts and security officers. They were polite. They brought him coffee. And they asked him the same questions over and over for days. When did you first suspect your sister? Why did you wait to report? What was the nature of your correspondence? Did you ever discuss classified information? Why did she confide in you? She didn't confide. I discovered it. Why did she let you discover it, Mr. Vance? Was it a signal? Were you part of the communication chain? They put him in a room with a polygraph machine. The examiner was a mild-mannered man who attached the sensors with a clinical, detached air. The questions were simple, brutal. Have you ever provided classified information to an unauthorized person? No. Are you now, or have you ever been, an agent of a foreign power? No. Did you knowingly conceal your sister's activities from the government? No. The needle jumped. You're showing a response on that last one, Arthur. The examiner said, his voice mild. I concealed it from the moment I found the one-time pad until the moment I arrived at the mission, Arthur said, his voice shaking. It was an hour. I was processing. An hour is a long time in this business, Arthur. His life at the State Department was reviewed. His colleagues were interviewed. His finances were audited. His meticulous gray existence was torn apart, examined for any trace of subversion. He was a company man, but his company had turned on him. His loyalty was now a liability, a potential vulnerability that his sister could have exploited. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Eleanor's fate was being sealed. The detention by the GDR was a sham. She was, as the CIA now knew, being debriefed by the HVA in a facility in Hohenschönhausen. She was giving them everything she had left: the names of her CIA case officers, the agency's internal procedures, and, most damagingly, her psychological profiles of her former colleagues. She was confirming the take from all the operations she had compromised. There was no public trial. There was not even an internal one. The Vance penetration was a deep, systemic wound, an embarrassment to be managed, not publicized. The CIA's response was institutional. Richard Kelleher was recalled from Berlin and reassigned to a windowless office in Langley, tasked with reviewing archival footage from the 1950s, a career desk kill. The Berlin base was purged. Dozens of officers were reassigned or forced into early retirement. The interrogation of Arthur Vance ended after 10 days. The conclusion was that he was not complicit but demonstrated poor judgment and represents a significant security risk due to his familial connection. He was released from the facility and driven to his apartment. He was placed on indefinite administrative leave from the State Department, his top-secret clearance immediately revoked. He was, in effect, a non-person. The silence was the worst part. Arthur returned to his apartment, but it was no longer a sanctuary. He felt observed. He assumed correctly that his phone was monitored. His mail had the subtle, telltale signs of being opened and resealed. His neighbors, other government employees, suddenly became too busy for conversation in the hallway. He was toxic. He spent his days in a fog of administrative limbo. He read history books. He listened to his classical records. But the structured world he had built was gone. His meticulous nature, once a professional asset, turned inward, becoming a form of obsession. He reviewed every memory of Eleanor, every letter, every conversation, searching for the real moment of betrayal. Had it been at Georgetown? Had it been her first posting? Had she ever been his sister at all? Or had Lorelei, the code name the CIA had assigned her file, been there all along? After 3 months, he was summoned to the State Department, not to his old office, but to a personnel hearing in a small, neutral conference room. A senior administrator, flanked by a security officer, read from a prepared statement. "Mr. Vance, the review of your case is complete. Given the circumstances, we find no grounds for termination. However, your clearance cannot be restored at this time. We are reassigning you to the Central Files Archive. Your duties will involve the cataloging and storage of non-sensitive historical documents." It was a professional execution. He was being sent to the basement. He would no longer handle cables, analyze reports, or participate in the long twilight struggle. He would be a janitor of history, a ghost in the bureaucratic machine he had once served so faithfully. He accepted. He had no other choice. The political and emotional consequences were total. The Vance name was now whispered in the halls of state and Langley. Arthur was the double agent's brother. He was a walking cautionary tale about the dangers of vulnerability. He never attempted to date again. He cut off contact with distant relatives, fearing he would taint them. His only contact with Eleanor came 6 months later. It was a single letter delivered via the Red Cross and heavily redacted by censors on both sides. The paper was coarse, the handwriting hurried. "Arthur," it read, "I am redacted. They are treating me redacted. I know you did what you believed was right. I hope you redacted. Do not write back. Redacted, Ellie." He read the final line, which had survived the censor's black pen. "I did what I thought was right too." He kept the letter, filing it away in his desk. It was the last piece of correspondence he would ever receive from her. The betrayal was complete, not just of a nation, but of a family. He had chosen the system, and the system had rewarded his loyalty by isolating him completely. The world had been divided into us and them, and Arthur Vance, by doing his duty, had found himself belonging to neither. Years turned into decades. The Cold War, which had seemed like a permanent, immutable state of being, began to crack. Arthur Vance remained in the Central Files Archive. He grew older. His hair turned from brown to gray to white. He became a fixture in the basement, a quiet, precise man who knew where every document from the 1950s was stored. New employees at State were told he was just the archives guy, unaware that he had once been at the center of a catastrophic intelligence failure. He lived through the SALT talks, the invasion of Afghanistan, Reagan's evil empire speech, and the rise of Gorbachev. The world was changing, but his life remained static, a long, quiet penance. Then, in November 1989, the world broke open. He watched on a small, grainy television in the archive break room as crowds of people swarmed the Berlin Wall. He saw them dancing atop the structure that had defined his life and destroyed his family. He felt nothing. No joy, no vindication, It was just an ending. In the chaos that followed, the Wende, or the Change, the East German state dissolved. The Stasi and the HVA, desperate to cover their tracks, began destroying their files. But they couldn't destroy everything. In the scramble, thousands of documents were saved by citizen activists, and others were quietly exfiltrated by Western intelligence. In 1992, Arthur was nearing retirement. A package arrived at his desk. It was an internal State Department envelope, but the contents were from Langley. There was no cover letter, only a thick, bound file stamped Secret No Foreign. The title was Operation Lorelei, Post-Mortem Analysis. The CIA, in possession of the HVA files, had finally closed the book on his sister. He spent the night reading it. The truth was worse than his suspicions. Eleanor had not been an idealist, balancing the scales. She had been recruited at Georgetown, long before she joined the CIA. Her HVA handler had been a charismatic literature professor, a Romeo agent who had seduced her with ideology and poetry. Her entire career in the CIA had been a lie. She was a penetration agent from the beginning. The file contained her HVA reports, translated from German. He saw his sister's clinical analysis of her CIA colleagues. He saw her reports on Richard Kelleher's drinking habits, on various case officers' personal vulnerabilities, and then he found the report on him. It was dated July 1967, after her visit. Asset brother, A. Vance, remained stable. Low-level access at state, but highly meticulous. Detail-oriented to a fault. Unquestioning loyalty to the U.S. system. Poses no threat, but his access to cable traffic could be a minor vulnerability if he were ever promoted. Recommend no further contact outside of sanitized family correspondence. He was not her brother. He was asset brother. A tool to be managed. The file also detailed her fate. After her defection, the HVA had given her a new identity and a desk job in East Berlin. She was a hero for a time. But when the wall fell, her heroism became a liability. The new unified German government sought to prosecute former Stasi agents. Eleanor Vance, known as Elke Schmidt, had been living in a small apartment in Rostock. She had not been traded in a spy swap. She had simply been left. The report concluded with a clipped addendum. She had succumbed to illness in 1991, alone and obscure, just months before this file was compiled. Arthur Vance retired in 1993. He left the State Department with a small pension and a handshake from an administrator who had only known him for 6 months. He moved from Foggy Bottom to a small, quiet house in the Virginia suburbs. His life's work was complete. He had served his country, upheld his oath, and paid an unimaginable price. The Lorelei file was the only classified document he ever took home. He kept it locked in his desk. He spent his retirement in quiet contemplation. He planted a garden. He read the history books he had once only cataloged. He often thought about the long twilight struggle. It had been described as a battle of ideologies, of freedom versus tyranny. But Arthur saw it differently. He saw a vast, impersonal machine. Two machines, in fact, the CIA and the HVA, identical in their methods, demanding total, inhuman loyalty. These systems were not built on ideals. They were built on human weakness, on leverage, on paranoia, and on the willingness of people to betray one another. Eleanor, he reflected, had been consumed by her own perceived cleverness, her cynicism, and her belief that she could stand outside the system and manipulate it. She thought she was a player in the game, but she was just another cog used by her HVA handlers and discarded when her utility ended. She had traded her family and her country for an ideology that, in the end, evaporated into history, leaving her with nothing. And what of his own loyalty? He, Arthur, had been the company man. He had done the right thing. He had followed procedure. He had reported the breach, sacrificing his sister to protect the institution. And what had the institution done? It had thanked him by exiling him, by turning his loyalty into a mark of suspicion. He, too, had been consumed. There was no moral clarity in the Vance penetration. There were no heroes. There was only the quiet, grinding tragedy of human lives caught in the gears of history. Eleanor had betrayed her country. He had betrayed his blood. Both, in their own way, had been destroyed by the very Cold War they had sought to navigate. Arthur Vance lived out his days in his small house, a living archive of a forgotten conflict. He died in 2003, a quiet death. When his house was cleared, the Lorelei file was found. By then, its secrets were no longer dangerous. They were just history, another set of dry, gray facts, filed away by a meticulous man who had seen the real, personal cost of the long twilight struggle.